부자재는 저희는 발효가 끝난 시점으로 다 잡고 있고 그 숨겨 넣은 세 개가 이제 여러분들이 보시는 걸 포함해서.
Hi everyone, I'm here in Seongsu at Seoul Brewery. I've just been through a talk with this guy about yeast health and how yeast affects your beer. So, this is Josh. Josh, do you want to, 3 or 4 sentences about who the hell's this guy? Who's this guy?
That's a good question. Josh Easton, technical manager, Lallemand Korea, Lallemand Brewing Korea. I've been here, I guess, brewing in 10 years in Korea, Magpie, Seoul Brewery, AB InBev, Jaffa, now Lallemand. So, kind of been all over and hopefully settling here.
I'm not laughing at him. I don't know this guy, if I'm gonna be honest, like to my viewers. You worked at Magpie. You said Magpie.
Yeah, that was my first job.
Shit.
10 years ago, I guess.
As far as beginner, intermediate, and advanced home brewers go, what are, I guess, 3 tips on those 3 levels that, like, if you're beginning, you should do this with yeast. If you're, as far as yeast health and yeast tips go, how would you tell a beginner, intermediate, and advanced home brewer to treat their yeast?
Beginner home brewer, just keep it as simple as possible. I wouldn't even attempt to repitch anything. Just buy the freshest yeast of your choice, and just go from there, whether it's liquid or dry, or you collect your own somehow. I mean, that's more advanced, I'd say, but
well, okay, so as far as intermediate goes, then what should they do?
I mean, intermediate, that's when you start to kind of dial in. I would say yeast health, it's the most complicated part of brewing. It's where the most things go wrong. So the more you can do to simplify it and don't worry about that so much, you're probably going to have better returns if you focus on your malt bill, on your water bill, maybe water last. But focus on the things that you have more control of or that are more easily understood.
Right.
Kind of build your recipe that way, and then kind of add in more parts. So if you're,
once you pitch the yeast, it's kind of out of your hands to a large degree.
Yeah. I mean, a good part of that is if you're making beer and it tastes off, then understand why it's off and kind of learn from that way. I was fortunate enough to start working in Korea when I could make mistakes at Magpie. I made some pretty terrible beer, but luckily for me at the time, the beer culture wasn't then what it is now.
Right.
So those mistakes kind of went unnoticed largely, but that was the fastest learning I ever did. Was just make a mistake and kind of learn from it. This happened. How do I fix that? So I think any kind of beginner, intermediate, pro.
Okay. Let me lead this. I'm here with Josh essentially because he just gave a lecture on yeast health, yeast behavior, how to make good beer, and yeast characteristics. So as far as like a pro home brewer goes, or even like a pro brewer, I was in an hour-and-a-half lecture with him. Don't do that. Don't do that. But like, what are some like kind of simple or key things that people at home can take from the lecture that we sat through? Like if you had to kind of summarize it in 3 things.
I think it's best to think of your yeast as a tiny little human, a tiny little version of yourself. In a lot of ways, it's doing the work that you want to do to the beer. So if you treat yeast like you want to be treated, so give it enough nutrition.
Birthday presents.
Be gentle to it. Exactly. Birthday presents. Yeast love presents, and whether it's oxygen or some kind of yeast nutrient or zinc especially. I think brewer of any level needs to kind of be considering the stresses that we're causing to yeast. So it's kind of universal. If I was beginning, I would just buy a fresh pitch of yeast, liquid, dry, add it in, don't worry about it. Intermediary, kind of start with your oxygen and maybe adding some of these nutrients to the wort. Pro, maybe consider propagating or cell counts or maybe investing in oxygenation for your worts, especially if you're using liquid or repitching. That's going to be crucial. So keep it simple, and then just kind of, once you're comfortable, once you're satisfied with your beer, add the next thing. Yeah.
As far as dry yeast goes and liquid yeast, and again, Lallemand in Korea is dry, so what are the pros and cons of that? Yeah.
Everywhere is dry yeast for us. That's our specialty.
Okay, so you don't do,
100 years of dry yeast. Lallemand is actually a baker's yeast. mostly is our primary business. Brewing is quite a small portion of
really?
the company overall.
Oh, okay. I had no idea. Anyway, yeah.
Probably have 12 divisions. I'd say.
Okay, yeah.
So, anyways, difference between dry and liquid. It used to be a bigger gap, I would say 10, 15, 20 years ago. There's very noticeable flavor differences, flavor characteristics between liquid and dry. But these days, with increased knowledge depth and processing capabilities, that gap is really narrowing. So now it's more of an issue of convenience and strain selection. So there's going to be more strains available to you in liquid form. Okay. Not every type of yeast can be dried. It needs to produce, you need to stress out the yeast so that it produces a certain type of sugar.
I'm learning right now. Seriously, yeah.
So only certain types of yeast produce enough of this trehalose sugar that it can kind of, once it's dried, it can kind of live off of.
Okay.
So lager yeasts are very hard, and some other strains are a little bit difficult to get that. So that's why not every liquid yeast can be a dry yeast, and certain strains do survive the drying process better. That's basically the biggest difference now is strain availability. Everything can be liquid. Dry yeast is liquid once it's fermented, right? So that's the biggest drawback now. Okay. But some of the benefits, there's more flavor possibility because you have different, wider range of yeast in liquid. But dry yeast has shelf life stability, ease of use. There's lots of benefits to dry as well. So it's really a choice for the brewer at the end of the day.
As far as the Philly sour goes, how did that come?
So it's isolated from a graveyard in Philadelphia, funny enough. It's not a...
Wait, hold on. Yeah. I thought that was an off-the-cuff joke. Well, hold on. What do you mean by that? It's isolated from a graveyard in Philadelphia. Sorry, can you elaborate on that?
Not from a body or anything, but like just in a tree.
Well, that's... When you say that, that's where my mind
exactly,
goes.
But I mean...
Sorry, continue.
It just kind of proves how kind of universal and ubiquitous yeast is. It's just everywhere all the time.
It just happens to be.
Yeah. So that's why it's sour. It's actually not a traditional beer yeast. It's not a Saccharomyces cerevisiae. It's a Lachantia strain. So it's a bit of a hybrid or misnomer.
What do you mean hybrid? It's cerevisiae or Saccharomyces?
It wasn't bred to make beer.
Sorry.
It wasn't bred to make beer. It didn't kind of evolve consuming wort sugars. It was found and it happens to consume wort sugars also. But the fun thing about it is
again,
the first
things I learned. Yeah.
The first 2 days or 3 days, it's turning glucose specifically into lactic acid.
Okay.
Which makes it
I know that. Yeah.
Right. And then after that, it switches into a normal standard beer fermentation.
On behalf of homebrewers everywhere, the Philly sour yeast is one of those yeasts that's like, ooh, fuck, I need to get my hands on lactobacillus. There's none of that. You put the yeast in, it sours it, and fucking ferments the beer. This is one of those, like, it's almost like a miracle. I don't want to sound like overly enthusiastic or complimentary. That's not my point. But yeah, it almost seems like it's like magic. Honestly, yeah,
absolutely. Yeah. I mean, like the souring process, there's a lot that can go wrong. You need dedicated equipment if you're using certain types of things, depending where you use it. So this is kind of an easier way to achieve the end result.
Did Verdant approach you? Did Lallemand approach Verdant? Like, this is an IPA yeast that's a very specific IPA yeast, and it's Verdant Brewery in England. How did that come about?
If you're a big brewery, it's kind of hard to juggle multiple strains. So this was their kind of house strain, and they, through our sales reps there, had a relationship. So what came first, the chicken, the egg, I'm not exactly sure, but we did end up on an agreement where we would dry their house strain. I mean, it's kind of a win-win. They're a well-known brewery. They make some fantastic beers, so it's nice that they kind of allowed it to be distributed so that everyone can kind of benefit from what they've managed to create as their house strain. So where do I see the yeast kind of culture going? Sorry, is maybe not the right word. I think you're going to see the benefits of dry yeast kind of predominate, and you're going to see these readily available strains maybe focus.
My yeast is about 80% dry. Yeah.
So like the workhorses or the ones you're familiar with are probably going to shift to dry, and some of these ones that behave as you would expect after the drying process. And then you're going to see more of like the GMO or the specialty strains kind of remaining liquid, as well as like the harder to dry strains. Right? So it's kind of an exciting time of yeast to be in the yeast industry. Whether you're a fan of dry or liquid, it's all everything's happening really quickly. It's kind of fun.
Nice. All right, I'm gonna give a shout out to Gary Radford. Is there a way to easily? This is the highest voted question. I have no idea if there's any veracity to this question.
No.
Right.
Unless
you get white lab yeast pouches and it's like 10 billion cells. Like they've counted it for you, and this is a professional yeast company. I can't. Again, I'm not trying to answer for Josh, but yeah, like it seems a bit ridiculous, no? Like actually counting how many cells are in any given.
It sounds ridiculous, and I mean it's an investment in equipment. If you're really serious about it, though, the process is quite simple.
Okay.
So it can be done pretty easily. But aside from that, hire one of those carnival guys that like counts the jelly beans and the.
As far as Lallemand goes, it's a very large company that's doing a lot of, like, again, as beer fanatics, we kind of just do, yeast, yeah. But they're doing a lot of crazy stuff. Like, is there something that you're aware of that Lallemand is doing that maybe we aren't aware of? That's like, oh shit, they're doing that? Oh wow. Something completely left field, yeah.
We actually have a pretty good GMO research lab that we acquired in America. So they're doing a lot of really interesting work on how to bring out some of these more flavorful components of yeast. So
okay.
There's a sour beer that puts off, I don't know, it's public at this point.
Disclose what you're allowed to. Yeah.
Anyways, our sour vicier, it's called. It's a GMO yeast that kind of creates these really nice fruity flavors. But that's only available in USA because of GMO policies around the world. So there's a lot of there's a lot of interest in that and like biotransformations.
Stefano, we love you. It's not your fault per se, but yeah, like sometimes I'm in Facebook groups about homebrewing. And it's like, yeah, like I'm doing X with Y, and I got like Z and no, Zed, that's right, as a Canadian. Anyway, sorry. But yeah, I'll be like, I genuinely don't know what the hell's going on. Like, this isn't even a yeast thing. It's like hops and malts and like just everything. Like again, that's not Soul Homebrew's fault, but the scope gets narrowed, let's say. Yeah, maybe not as professional brewers, but as home brewers, we get given what we're given, right? Yeah.
I mean, I think
would you like to talk about that? Yeah, I mean, you've professionally brewed, you've home brewed.
I mean,
would you say we're more limited in Korea? Sorry.
I don't think it's a Korean thing. I think most countries around the world, except for America,
outside of the big, yeah.
It's a little bit more cautious about
Fair
GMO.
Play. Yeah. Fair play.
Whether that's the right decision or not, I don't really have an opinion on that. But it is what it is, and I don't think Korea's at a disadvantage. If you're relying solely on Thiolised yeast or the yeast to drive.
Oh, that's another thing too. Thiolised yeast I've learned about. It's like I don't even know how to start doing that.
There's actually a bit of backlash now because it's so dominant, the flavors that it creates, that maybe it's kind of overpowering and too similar.
There's a bit of pushback against that. Again, for the layman, Thiolised yeast is like a new yeast that like it processes certain things in the wort differently. And it has like juicy, like winey flavors to it. I've never had one. I'm only going from what I've read. But am I essentially right there? For the layman, let's say.
Yeah.
Is that essentially right? Yeah.
Yeah. There's components in hops that are very free.
Right.
Unbound thiols, which are your Mosaic and Nelson Sauvin, and like the more expensive hops have a lot of free thiols, right?
Aside, I fucking love Nelson Sauvin. Anyway.
So it tastes good because these thiols we've determined are very prevalent in wine, and they're just freely available in certain types of hops, the expensive ones.
Josh, pleasure. Again, we're meeting each other for the first time today.
Yep.
But
long-time listener.
Yeah.
First time.
Again,
caller.
This means the world to me that he fucking watches my videos. Again, I deserve nothing and receive much. Life's good. But yeah, thank you for talking about yeast today. As far as yeast goes, I use a lot of Mangrove Jack, but yeah, I use a lot of Lallemand too. Yeah, I have a diamond yeast lagering right now, and
Any yeast is a good
He'll get
yeast.
some. He'll get some.
Just brew more. Just homebrew more. Brew more professionally.
Honestly,
Pick your yeast of choice and just grow the industry. That's all.
if you're worried about like how to brew, fucking PM me. Honestly, Kevin Grab, you know my name.